I remember when I learned my first major scale, all of a sudden I could play all of the right notes and everything opened up for me. And then a few years later, I was stuck inside that scale. And it's so easy to get locked into a specific scale sound in certain chord progressions, and it can be really hard to break outside of those. One of the easiest ways to start expanding your harmonic vocabulary and note choices doesn't even involve scales or chords. I'm talking about intervals. An interval is the difference in pitch between two notes. That's it. But this is a huge subject that you can spend years diving into. I want to offer one simple approach that's helped me to go beyond the major scale. The most important step to getting a handle on intervals is to understand how they sound. To do this, I'm going to play a low E as a drone, and against that I'll go through each chromatic note and let my ears start to understand the relationship between those notes and the root note. So we'll start with the minor second, or the flat 2. It's F here. That's a very dissonant interval. It wants to resolve down to the root note. Major second, or the second. That is unstable as well, but not quite as much so as the minor second. And that also wants to resolve down. Or it might actually want to resolve up, too. Next we have the minor third, in this case G. This would be a sound coming from your minor chord. It's at rest, it's pretty stable, and it has a little bit of a darker sound. This is the major third, or the third. Same deal here. It's at rest. Feels very stable, but has a brighter sound than the minor third. Next you have the fourth, the perfect fourth. A here. Fairly stable, but it also wants to go down. Like a suspension, resolved to one of the thirds. Flat 5. B flat here, the tritone. Very dark and dissonant interval. Kind of wants to go up to the fifth. If you hang on it for too long, really crunchy. Next you have the fifth, the perfect fifth. This is the strongest interval besides your octave or your root note. This is what makes up a power chord, the root and the fifth. Very much stable and at home here. Minor 6, in this case C, that's a dark sounding interval, really good for minor sounds. That kind of wants to go down to the fifth. Major 6 is the same way, or the sixth. C sharp here. Maybe a little bit more at rest than the minor 6, but that also wants to resolve down. But it's got a brighter sound than the minor 6. Next we have the minor 7th. This is kind of unstable as well. It really wants to go up. But this is a really common note. You have it in pentatonic scales. It's in dominant 7 chords, minor 7 chords. But not one that you linger on too long because it wants to go somewhere else. And then the major 7th. This is your leading tone. We call it a leading tone because it wants to lead back to the root note. It's really dissonant. It really is pulling your ear towards. If it was to go, that's not where your ear wants it to go. It wants it to go here. So here's all these notes back to back. Listen to the way these sound against this root note. As you can tell, each of these have their own unique sound and feel, and you can highlight those sounds by focusing on that interval. If I take the open low E string on guitar as a starting point, I can write some basic riffs and explore these intervals. Maybe I'll start with a flat 2, which has a very classic metal sound, as opposed to, say, the major third. Maybe I'll combine a couple intervals together. I'll do the major third and the major 6. How about the major third and the minor 6? So just one note different. That sounds instantly much darker, just changing one note. I could do the major third, minor 6, and major 6. That has an interesting sound to it. I could also just explore a bunch of intervals back to back. every single one of those has a slightly different sound, and it's not like I was writing very cool riffs there, but I'm getting the sound of those intervals in my head. So if I want to create a specific riff that's going to feel a certain way, I can really lean into certain intervals. The combination of a couple of these intervals together usually make up part of a scale. I know what those are because of my theory background, but you don't need to know the specific scales. It's more about the feeling of each of the intervals. One last thing to recognize here is the difference between intervals of the same number. For instance, the minor third and the major third, or the minor sixth and the major sixth. I'll often choose one of these over the other to get a specific sound that I'm going for. So how would I use this interval approach in some actual music? For that, I want to take a look at the main motif from my song, The Great Stereopticon. This is rooted on E, just like I was doing earlier, and the intervals here were very carefully chosen. It starts with a minor third, giving a minor vibe right away. Then it moves to the minor seventh and the major sixth. This major sixth adds a lightness and keeps this from sounding too dark. I was going for a weird, cynical, slightly comedic feel here, and this blending of darker and lighter sounding intervals is helping to achieve that. From here, it goes flat 5, 5, 4, flat 5. All of those come from a minor blues scale. But my focus here was on that flat 5, which has a very dissonant and evil sound. But once again, I'm balancing that with more consonant intervals, the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth, and blending those lighter and darker sounds together. The ending of the melody uses the flat 2 and major seventh, some of the most dissonant intervals against that root of E. The flat 2 brings that really menacing Phrygian sound, and the major seventh helps to lead back to the root note. These intervals were specifically chosen here to give me the overall sound and feel that I wanted. Now, I didn't sit down and think, oh, flat 2 here and major 6 here. It was much more of a trial and error approach, but my knowledge of the way these intervals sound helped to inform my decisions. Let's hear how this would sound if I stuck inside a specific scale. How about the natural minor scale? That sounds okay, but it loses pretty much all of the interesting notes that were in the original melody. How about E Dorian? That has the major 6, and it sounded better than the natural minor to me, but it doesn't have that darkness of the flat 2 and flat 5 that the original does. How about something a little bit less straightforward, like a half-whole diminished scale? That's the closest to the vibe that I was going for so far, but this is actually a little bit too dark. It misses some of the levity that the original has. If I turn the notes from the actual melody into a scale, it's this. And this isn't any scale that I've ever heard of, and if I was stuck to always using notes from a specific scale, I'd never be able to create melodies like this. Let's change just a few of the intervals and hear how that sounds. I'm going to change the minor second to a major second, and the major 6 to a minor 6. These are seemingly small changes, but they completely transform this melody, and that's the power of intervals. Even one interval change within a larger melody or riff can completely change the mood of that riff or melody. As I mentioned before, there's a lot further you can go with intervals, especially when you start dealing with intervallic relationships within more complex chord progressions. But this approach of experimenting with intervals over one root note is one of the best ways to get the sound and feel of these intervals into your ears. If you're wanting to break outside of basic scale shapes and get some more colorful sounds in your music, give some of these ideas a shot for yourself. And if you enjoyed this lesson, subscribe, hit the bell notification, like, comment, share, all of that. Until next time, stay proggy.